one's actions, according to the Buddha, mattered more than one's status. And he described the Sangha as an ocean in which all waters intermingle, unified by the taste of freedom. But I think it's important for us to understand that the Buddha's life was never free from conflict, that this was a human being born into a time of turmoil, who had great challenges in his life, and that he awakened, not removed from the harshness of times. He still lived within a world that was marked by violence, by conflict, by grief, by betrayal, by aging, and a world marked by death. Thich Nhat Hanh characterizes this perspective with, our own lives are the instrument with which we experiment with truth. Don't just follow the rules. Don't just do what other people do. Test everything. Be a scientist yourself.
Roshi, we're talking about Mara being your favorite bedeviled character. I just realized Mara's favorite breakfast, bedeviled eggs.
You tell the worst jokes. I think they're dad jokes. You're the master of dad jokes.
Friends, welcome to episode 42 of Vibe with Venerables, 1 hour of light Dharma and dialogue where you get to talk directly to a respected Venerable. I'm Meng, co-founder of Buddhism-dot-net, and your host. Of course, 42 is the answer to the ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything. Anyway, welcome. So today we celebrate the return of one of my dearest friends and one of the greatest American Zen masters alive, Roshi Joan Halifax. Roshi has spent her life exemplifying compassion. She cares for the dying. She led yearly expeditions to deliver healthcare to remote mountain regions up to her late 70s. She stands up for the environment, and she stands up for social justice. And in addition to all that, she founded the Upaya Zen Center. She helped found the Mind and Life Institute, and she authored at least 9 books. And if you ever want to know what a bodhisattva with a human body looks like, just go to Upaya and spend a week with Roshi. Roshi is an inspiration for all of us. And in today's class, Roshi will talk about birth, awakening, and death, the human journey of the Buddha. So Roshi will talk for roughly 30 minutes and then answer your questions live. And as a reminder, this session will be recorded and then uploaded on YouTube. And if you're comfortable doing so, we would like to invite you to turn your camera on so that you can be seen by Roshi. Roshi, can we invite you to start us off with a prayer?
Oh, it's my honor to do that. I actually would love to invite us to spend just a few moments in meditation, which is, prayer in the body, and to allow ourselves to settle into this time of meeting each other and also exploring briefly the life of the Buddha, which, of course, Vesak marks in his birth, his awakening, and his death, and what this means for our lives. So let's be Buddha for at least a few moments now, with breath deep in the body. And remembering really why we're here. Not just that we were born, not just that we turned our computers on and we're on Zoom, but really we've gathered in this time together because all of us have this deep imperative to awaken and to end suffering in this world. And it's often helpful to bring to mind some being or situation where you feel connection and where there's challenge, there's difficulty. It could be in a war zone, or it could be a family member who's sick. Really touching into the truth of suffering with the sense that suffering can be mitigated. Suffering can be transformed. This is the great teaching of the Buddha. So thank you for these few moments of being together in the body in this time. You know, the time of the Buddha was not altogether different from what we're experiencing now. The Buddha was born into a world of radical instability, a world where social change was in process, and also many were on the road, so to speak, looking for spiritual awakening, trying to understand and come to terms with the existential issues. And there's very little archaeological evidence that has survived from the time of the Buddha. Historically, the Indus Valley civilization, which was around 1900, before the Common Era, from that time on, the use of writing appears to have largely disappeared from much of northern India. And culture was actually transmitted primarily through oral tradition. And the Buddha was born into that time, about 500 years before the birth of Christ. He was born into a small clan, a farming clan, the Sakya clan, which was also a trading community that was situated along important trade routes in northern India. And it's interesting, often from the legendary perspective, the Buddha is portrayed as a prince and his father as a king, but probably not in the imperial sense. More likely, the father of the Buddha was a tribal headman responsible for guiding a somewhat small republic. And the people of that he was guiding, the Sakyans, they themselves lived under increasing pressure from expanding kingdoms and militarized states. So it's important to understand the Buddha's life from the historical perspective, to see that the atmosphere of social and political uncertainty of that era, the unrest of that era, the challenges that were facing, the different co-cultures in that area or in that era are something for us to look at, because today we also are experiencing unrest and radical uncertainty. I mean, the world around him was changing rapidly. Armies were growing, wealth and trade were actually increasing, and the communal life of the past was beginning to collapse. And it was a time when spiritual seekers wandered from village to village, asking important questions, fundamental questions about suffering, about mortality, and about freedom. And into this unstable world, Siddhartha Gautama was born. And his mother had an interesting name. Her name was Maya, and that name in Sanskrit means illusion. And it's so powerful to consider the relevance of her name, not as though it's a problem, but as though it's a kind of recipe or reality. That the Buddha was born from Maya, from the world of conditioned existence itself. I find it so powerful that the first, quotes, appearance of the Buddha, of course, he had lives before that, which are in the Jataka tales, but that, the Buddha himself was born from illusion, from samsara. And that legendary dimension points to something, that awakening doesn't come from outside of samsara, from outside of our everyday existence. I mean, it arises within our ordinary lives and through our ordinary lives. It emerges from within the world of appearance and impermanence. So I want to just put that parenthesis, if you will, around the story of the Buddha's birth, which Vesak marks. That awakening happens within the context of our lived experience. Now, according to the story, again, there's the legendary dimension and the historical dimension. And this is a kind of mix of the legendary and the historical that I'm exploring with you. But on the night before the Buddha was conceived, Queen Maya, or Maya, the mother-to-be of the Buddha, she had a powerful dream, and she dreamed that a white elephant carrying a lotus flower descended from the heavens and entered her side. Now, elephants in that world symbolized spiritual sovereignty. And of course, the elephant entering into the right side of Maya's body means something in the world of Hinduism, and that is wisdom. Wisdom is carried in the right side of the body. And because of this dream, the court sages interpreted this dream as a sign that Maya would give birth to an extraordinary being, either a universal monarch or a fully awakened Buddha. Now, that's a very high bar, needless to say. And we see, the results of that prophecy in terms of some very fundamental choices that the Buddha made early in his life. But going back to the birth of the Buddha, Queen Maya, as was the custom in that time, decided to go to her parental home and there to give birth. And along the way, she stopped in the Lumbini Grove, and it apparently was filled with birds and flowering trees and just absolutely exquisite place. And there, standing beneath a blossoming sala tree, she reached up and held one of the branches of the tree, and the Buddha was born painlessly from her right side. And then, according to legend, the infant Siddhartha immediately took 7 steps, and with each step, lotus flower bloomed beneath his feet. And this is always, causes me to smile in the text, as he pointed to the sky, and then he pointed to the earth, and he declared, "Above the heavens and below the heavens, I alone am the world-honored one." Well, it sounds a little bit like, a sort of an ego trip, but actually from the Mahayana perspective, this can be interpreted as not pointing toward the personal self, but to Buddha nature itself, the awakened nature inherent in all beings, including you, Meng, and all of you. It's kind of a beautiful vision. And on next to the door that goes into my sleeping area, there's a beautiful statue of Shakyamuni Buddha as an infant, pointing up to the heavens and pointing down to earth. Now, again, from the legendary perspective, there's less celestial beings appearing, and flowers are raining from the sky, and streams of water are bathing Queen Maya and Siddhartha. And there's just this feeling of great celebration. But 7 days after the Buddha was born, his mother died. And so fortunate that her sister, Mahaprajapati Gautami, later became the first Buddhist nun. She became the stepmother of the Buddha and was a really good stepmother. So, from the point of view of the Buddhist tradition, the story of Buddha's birth is understood. It's not simply a literal history, but it's a sacred narrative, in fact, that expresses the extraordinary nature of awakening itself, that wisdom is born into this world through compassion and through the intimate connection between heaven, earth, and human life. Now, even with the death of Queen Maya, the sense of auspiciousness spread, among many. And sages predicted two great possibilities for Gautama Buddha, that he either become a worldly ruler, a king, or a fully awakened spiritual teacher. And we are the lucky beneficiaries of choices that Buddha made, because his father hoped to protect him from suffering. And he steered him, away from the difficulties of life. He was, kind of in a very privileged position. But Siddhartha seemed to have been very perceptive from the very beginning of his life. And perhaps he was aware that beneath the beauty and the privilege of his life, in fact, there was fragility and loss. And I find that personally very, very moving, this kind of intuition that the young Siddhartha had about the truth of suffering, and also what was to become, the Four Noble Truths, the transformation of suffering. Now, there's a story about his childhood that I really love, and it is the story of Siddhartha underneath the rose apple tree. And as a boy, Siddhartha accompanied his father to a farming ceremony. And while the adults were occupied with ritual and with labor in the fields, Siddhartha wandered away, and he sat quietly beneath the shade of a rose apple tree. I mean, I think it's very beautiful. He was born under a tree, the solid tree. Now he is under a rose apple tree, and he's looking out at what's happening, with the Sakyan people as they're plowing the field and celebrating. And he sees the plow cutting into the earth, and he notices that insects and worms are exposed, and they're being injured or killed by cultivation, and birds are descending and feeding on the insects and the worms. And in some versions of the story, there's a kind of intuition that the young Siddhartha has, that life feeds on life. That is to say, beneath the beauty of society and the beauty of and wonder of prosperity, Siddhartha, the young Siddhartha, intuited something about vulnerability and struggle. And yet, rather than recoiling into despair, something extraordinary happens. Siddhartha has this dropping down. His mind settles naturally into a state of calm, into clarity, into ease. And what we now know is called the first jhana. And this is a very interesting moment, I think an important moment, because it reveals something about awakening in Buddhism. The future Buddha did not enter into a trance. The future Buddha, Siddhartha, did not escape the world. He became deeply intimate with the world. He looked into, as Wordsworth said, has written in his poem on Tintern Abbey, into the life of things. He saw both beauty and he saw suffering simultaneously. And out of that experience, a kind of stillness arose, not through withdrawal from reality, but through direct connection with it, bearing witness to it, samadhi, not separate from it. Well, now, the story goes, and just checking time. Okay, we're good. So I know many of you know the story, and I just, since it was Vesak, I thought, and there are many other details, but I just thought, I think I want to tell the story again, leaving out some great parts, but anyway, stay with me.
Roshi, as much time as you want. So don't worry about
Okay,
it.
thank you. It's such a beautiful story. It's about awakening in the midst. And also, the Buddha had a very human life. You know, he got married and he had a son, and he also had to sneak out of the palace, but I'm not there yet. So years later, after the Buddha subjected himself to really severe asceticism that weakened him greatly, he would remember this childhood experience and realize that this very important thing, that this balanced, this lucid, this compassionate state of mind, neither indulgent nor self-punishing, was in fact the path. And this, of course, he was to characterize in the first turning of the wheel when he met his good friends who had abandoned him after he awakened, as he characterized it as the middle way. This middle way. And, you know, I think it was during a talk Thich Nhat Hanh gave many, many years ago, where he described during one of the Buddha's ascetic exercises, where he looked out at a field being plowed and saw the plow cutting into the earth and the earth falling to either side, and had this vision of the middle way. It's a beautiful image. And anyway, going back to the Buddha's early life, or Siddhartha's early life, you know, his father really attempted to shield him from suffering. And inside the palace walls, according to legend, there was music, there was comfort, there was pleasure, young people, very idyllic, very paradisical. But Siddhartha had this kind of restlessness, and he needed to venture beyond the walls of the palace. and what he encountered. So important, described in the text as the four passing sights. First, he saw an old person, and then someone who was so sick, and then he saw a corpse. And he suddenly understood that aging and illness and death, they spare no one. Wealth can't protect. Status cannot protect. Political systems, family structure, privilege, all this can't shield us from the truth of impermanence and the truth of our mortality. And then the fourth passing sight, he saw a wandering mendicant, someone who had really nothing but serenity. He just radiated peace. He radiated this kind of quiet joy. And in that figure, Siddhartha glimpsed another possibility for human life. Not denial, not distraction, but awakening. And this precipitated Siddhartha leaving his home, his father, his mother, his wife, and his son. And this act is traditionally called going forth and leaving home, going into homelessness, being a mendicant, a beggar. But spiritually, it means something much deeper. It means stepping beyond our inherited identity, stepping beyond social certainty, and stepping far beyond conventional ambition. I mean, it means becoming radically open. Wow. Such an extraordinary and brave thing to do. Siddhartha then traveled south to Magadha and to Rajgir, and he studied with renowned meditation teachers, and he mastered profound states of concentration. But even in these very exalted experiences that he had, he didn't resolve these basic existential questions at the center of his life. And he then began to undertake severe ascetic practices with his 5 companions near Gaya and fasted almost to death. But he discovered self-punishment was not liberation. I think this is important for us to sit with at this time. Harming ourselves, but also indulgence won't get us there. So in the story, it says, at the point of collapse, a young village woman named Sujata offered him rice that was cooked in milk, and it revived him. But his companions were not happy. They thought he had kind of been, he was weak for accepting the rice milk. And Siddhartha remembered the rose apple tree, and he understood that experience of awakening, and the experience of awakening required balance. And then he crossed the Niranjara River, and he sat beneath the Bodhi tree. And he committed himself not to rise until he understood the nature of suffering and of freedom. I don't know if any of you have been to Bodh Gaya. I mean, the tree is amazing. It's now kind of walled off, or it was when I was there some years ago. And there's just hundreds, if not thousands of people, and all these, temples of every Buddhist sect all around the Bodh tree. But I think in the time of the Buddha, it was a very different feeling, even though today, or when I was last there, the feeling of devotion was really profound. But Bodh Gaya has changed. It's not as it was in the time of the Buddha. The Buddha sat there, and he sat there with determination. And there's this powerful description in the Pali Canon of describing his awakening through the watches of the night. And I don't have time to talk about Mara showing up, which is part of the story, which I really love. Maybe we can do another time on Mara, who's one of my favorite bedevilments, so to speak. But in any way, in any case, so the Buddha, in the course of his meditation, in the first watch, he saw the conditioned nature of existence and how basically all phenomena arise through causes and conditions. There's just no way of getting around it. And then he saw that nothing exists independently and permanently. And then he saw in the third watch the arising and the cessation of suffering. He saw that greed and hatred and delusion bind humans, bind us, and bring us again and again into states of suffering and confusion. But what is remarkable is that his awakening was not transcendence in the conventional sense, in the sense of escaping the world. The Buddha awakened through penetrating deeply into the very fabric of ordinary existence. This, I think, is critical. It was not about transcendent or mystical experiences. It was, again, seeing deeply into our conditioned existence, into the life of this world. So we can understand that Buddhism is not about fleeing the necessities of life. It's about seeing clearly through life and compassionately through the medium of our lived experience and the lived experience of others. And, you know, after his enlightenment, and there are various other stories around this, but just shortening things a little bit, the Buddha first hesitated to teach. In fact, he sat longer under the Bodhi tree after his so-called awakening. I love in the Denko-roku, the transmission of light by Jochen Kazan, the Buddha exclaimed upon his awakening, "I, the earth, and all beings simultaneously realize the way." I mean, the Buddha penetrated into the nature of awakening of all beings upon seeing the morning star. And then the Buddha continued to sit. And finally, Brahma, according to legend, urged the Buddha to share the Dharma in order to benefit beings everywhere. And he met his friends, and he did have a challenge along the way, but that's another story. But in any case, he got together with his old friends, and his old friends saw that something extraordinary had happened to him. And he taught again under another tree. And his first sermon to the 5 ascetics who had abandoned him. But that first sermon was an articulation of the middle way and the Four Noble Truths. The reality of suffering, the cause of suffering, the possibility of freedom from suffering, and the path leading toward liberation. And it's important for us to understand that the Buddha's teaching was not just personal. It was social, profoundly social. And he attempted, in the fostering of his own community, to flatten out that community and to end the caste system for that community. I think this is, a very radical political act that the Buddha engaged in. Creating a community in which caste and inherited status no longer defined a human being. I mean, one's actions, according to the Buddha, mattered more than one's status. And he described the Sangha as an ocean in which all waters intermingle, unified by the taste of freedom. This is such a beautiful image from the early canon. And women were also admitted into the monastic order through the persistence and encouragement of Mahapajapati, the Buddha's foster mother, and the intervention of his cousin Ananda. And that also was, a big shift in social conventions. And he also ordained, as I said in a previous meeting with Meng, a serial killer and also a so-called untouchable. For the first time in Buddhist history, those on the margins of society were embraced, according to history. But I think it's important for us to understand that the Buddha's life was never free from conflict. As he aged, there were extraordinary political tensions. Kingdoms expanded through violence. Rivalries emerged within the Sangha. His cousin, Devadatta, even attempted a schism within the Sangha and sought to have the Buddha murdered. So, also, the Sakya people were eventually destroyed in political violence. This is very important, as, again, there's the legendary dimension for us to enjoy the story of Buddha's life, but it's the human dimension that we relate to, that this was a human being born into a time of turmoil, who had great challenges in his life. And that he awakened, not removed from the harshness of times. He still lived within a world that was marked by violence, by conflict, by grief, by betrayal, by aging, and a world marked by death. It's to understand awakening does not erase and did not erase for the Buddha the human condition. It actually transformed the way suffering could be met and can be met. Now, near the end of his life, the Buddha continued traveling despite illness and exhaustion. He stayed for a time in the grove of the courtesan Ambapali, and he became seriously ill, and he told Ananda, please, be an island unto yourselves, he said to the few followers that were with him at that time. I think Thich Nhat Hanh characterizes this perspective with our own lives are the instrument with which we experiment with truth. Don't just follow the rules. Don't just do what other people do. Test everything. Be a scientist yourself. But to continue with the story, finally in the town of Kusinara, he lay down between two sala trees and just thinking about, he was born underneath a sala tree. Now 2 sala trees were at his head and at his feet. His head was facing north. toward his homeland. His beloved cousin and disciple Ananda wept. And the Buddha there offered his final teaching on impermanence and also on diligence, and as well on the precepts. Follow the precepts. I mean, in fact, his final message was simple and was fundamentally, completely unsentimental. All conditioned things are subject to decay. Practice with diligence. And the Buddha died not as a god. He died as a human being. As a human being who had fully entered life. He was born into instability. He awakened in the midst of suffering. And he died in a fractured political world. Yet, from beginning to end, his very life demonstrated the possibility of freedom within our world, within our lived experience, within this very world, not elsewhere. And I think that is why the Buddha's life still speaks to us today. Because you and I live in uncertain times. We too face political conflict. We face ecological fragility. We face social division. We age, if we're lucky, but we age. We experience illness. Finally, we die. And the Buddha's response was not despair. It was not futility. It was awakening. It was compassion. It was the courage to see clearly and to remain fully human. So thank you for listening, as you probably have heard this story many times, to this rendition. I thank you for being here, and Meng for inviting me. And I think we're going to take some time for questions. So let's do that.
Roshi, I've heard this story many times, but coming from you is different.
Oh, thank
because
you.
You speak with such power and compassion. It's just different when hearing from your voice. So friends, we entered our Q&A section of our program. So shall we just take a moment to take a breath and absorb what we just learned in breath and out, and reflecting on what we just learned and how that affects our lives. And so if you have any question for Roshi, or if you have any reflections you want to share with Roshi, you can use the hand raising function on Zoom, and then I'll ask you to unmute yourself. Or you can enter the question during the Zoom's using Zoom's Q&A function, or you can upvote a question that's already entered. And in general, we give preference to live questions. Okay, we have a live question from Micah.
Hello.
Nice to meet you, Michael. Where are
Hi,
you
nice
now?
to meet you.
Where
I'm
are
in
you now?
Florida. Florida currently.
Where in Florida?
Margate, Florida.
Okay.
It's a small town. My question was, I saw on your Facebook that you do art. I also
Yes.
do art. My question
Oh.
is, how has doing art deepened your Buddhist practice? And do you have any best suggestions of how to deepen your Buddhist practice through art?
You know, it's such a beautiful question, because I was painting just before I came on with Meng, and I had been teaching a little bit before that. And I will tell you, you saw my Facebook thing. I said that I was painting a fire, but it was interesting because when I paint, I'm extremely peaceful. I'm completely present. I'm not thinking, which is wonderful. And I'm not trying to please a buyer. If anything, these paintings that I make, if they're bought by anybody, the funds from the sale of them go to support the projects that we do at Upaya in relation to feeding the unsheltered and caring for the dying and working in the prison. But I do it for the pure meditative joy of it. And that is very liberating. And honestly, now that you've asked the question, I will tell you, because I am not separate from the news of the world. I, follow what's happening through all kinds of media, all kinds of news channels and so forth, because I really care about the time that we're in, the era that we're in, the suffering that we're in. It turns me more deeply to my practice. But sometimes I feel disturbed in a very bad way. I have anger arise or I feel heartbroken. And, when the perturbation becomes unhealthy for me, then I go and I paint. It's my medicine. Or I write a haiku, and that's my medicine to bring me back to the present moment. So I'd like to hear for a moment from you, Michael, what your paintings are like.
I do political cartoons.
Okay.
I've been told not to make them because it's upsetting people to a certain extent, but it makes me feel better to make jokes about the situation that's happening in the world. I don't.
Well, don't hesitate. Just, I think that humor is a really important part of awakening. And Meng is one of the funniest people I know. He would agree with me thoroughly.
Yes,
So,
I'm a Mahayana Buddhist. Yes.
yes. And he knows I also use a lot of humor or am subject to great humor myself. So, and also I think that political cartoons are a teaching. You're helping
Mm,
people see things in a different way. So maybe, some people are trying to not learn. You don't have to listen to everybody. Listen to your good
Yeah.
heart. Okay, Michael?
thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Roshi, on to follow on Michael's question, I understand that there was a time in your life when you were very young, you lost your sense of sight. Right? And
Well,
how does that
yes.
affect your current life and also especially your painting?
It's interesting because I actually have lost sight recently out of my right eye.
Oh,
And I know, it's really a
mm,
trip. And
mm,
which was my dominant eye. And so my left eye, because now I have wet macular degeneration. So the
mm,
world is all kind of mixed up, like it's very, very interesting to it's like going back to this situation of my childhood. But that one of the things I learned during my heart surgery or two heart surgeries, I accepted that I was gravely ill, and I accepted that I could easily die from the situation, and I got very close. And Wendy is, the witness, my assistant, my Jisha, who's also an emergency room doctor, and saw me through that whole situation. I was very peaceful. I just accepted, whatever was going to happen to me and whatever I was subjected to in terms of medical interventions, which were extensive. I mean, two open heart surgeries in 12 days is a
mm,
record,
mm,
so to speak, for some people have
mm, mm,
two in a year, but I had two in 12 days. And it reminded me of the state I experienced when I was a child. And also, because I'm now visually impaired, um, uh, it's acceptance. I feel lucky. I'm not in a war zone, for example. My left eye is still somewhat functioning. Though I see dimly and in strange ways, I feel like I see in another kind of way. And I'm not, if I were younger, maybe I'd be upset by it. But I'll be 84 shortly. So I've had a very deep and rich and fortunate life. And, I've encountered many blind people in my years, and they have rich and deep and important lives. So I'm not worried. I'm interested. But how it affects my painting is it's interesting. While I have one somewhat functioning eye, I'm painting a lot while I can see. So I've been every break I have when I'm not resting or teaching, I'm there in my little studio painting.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, I'll just make a comment, friends. So last year, you were here on our show, and it was just before you went into surgery, and you told a few of us, but it wasn't public knowledge, so we couldn't tell anybody.
Yeah.
But I was very touched at the time because I know how hard that was for you. It was very scary. It was open heart surgery, and it became two open heart surgeries, and you were so like calm and like I'm pretty sure the audience did not notice that there was anything happening. And there was in the background, like secretly sad and everything. I mean, I didn't show it as well, but I was like touched by the power of your practice. And even today, you're showing it. I mean, before we came on this show, Roshi and I we were in the green room trading jokes. And I had no idea, Roshi, that you're losing your sight in the right eye.
Yeah.
Something that heavy that is affecting you. And
Yeah.
I mean, you're still your normal, jolly, kind, compassionate self.
Well,
Yeah, and
what else?
so yes. So I'm just touched by the power of your practice.
Well, I want to say I, I owe my life to my practice. I honestly, I don't think I'd be alive, save for, I started practicing in the mid 60s.
Mhm.
And, I explored many different religious possibilities, if you will. And Buddhism is just extraordinarily pragmatic. It's so practical. And the
Mm.
practice itself, it's tough, but it's revelatory, particularly if you stay the course.
Mm.
And I saw, the person I am today is still a little bit the person I was, a half a century ago or more. But the other side of the equation is that the kind of suffering I had in my early years is just not in my life now. It's just gone. And
Mm.
it's not just age, it's the gift of practice.
Right.
And I feel very fortunate. So, all of you who are online, and Meng knows well, please do not abandon your practice. Really.
Yes. Yes. It was the
People,
same for me.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Buddhism saved my life. Same thing.
And, we need strong, stable, grounded, funny, deep hearted, sensitive, and wise people today. So,
So I'm funny. So I
I don't know
qualify
if
for
I'm
one of those things.
yeah, I don't know if any of us are here today, but anyway,
Mm.
the Buddha outlined a pretty good recovery program from samsara.
Mm. Mm. Thank you. Okay, there's no question. I have some more questions for you, Roshi. Roshi, something that I think something you talked about earlier in the talk today, something really important is that enlightenment is found within this very world, not outside, not something we escape, but within this very world. And I'm trying to figure out how to practice that. And so I think of every day or so, I look at news, I say, oh my God, what did he do this time? And then I say, oh my God, he did this time today. And again, like despair, mostly despair, also anger. And how do we use that as a vehicle to practice so that we can move closer towards enlightenment?
Yeah. Well, I think it's a great question. I think that using your futility, despair, anger, moral outrage, all of those are forms of suffering, but it's not to bypass those. Those actually become the energy that has you deepen your commitment to practice and to really show up.
Mm.
And I think that, that's what the Buddha discovered also, how it's within the complicated political system at the time of the Buddha's life, small potatoes probably compared to the complexity of, the global catastrophe we're in terms of, climate change and the horrendous politics of our administration and what's happening globally with, economic disparity and sexism and racism, and the list goes on and on. Okay, this is an invitation for us to wake up. It's to stay the course, to clean up our acts, to do the work that makes it possible for us to respond skillfully to the suffering in the world. And it's now or never. And I'm counting on those coming after me, but I am certainly, in spite of my age and whatever infirmities I have at this point in my life, I don't feel at all like I need to stop. I need to continue. I need to deepen my practice, but I also need to continue to serve.
Thank you. I
Just
don't think
like
you've
you
served
are.
enough. Yes, but I don't think you've done enough. So I'm inspired for coming from you, saying that even you need to serve.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
it's a calling, and
Mm,
I'm grateful. I listen. You know this about me. I get so much joy
mm,
from helping others.
mm,
That's just basically it.
mm.
So I
Thank you.
think we're kind of at the end of our
That's
thing. So
right. That's right. I know it's so many things to talk about, but I know you have to go. So Roshi has a hard stop because she has a teaching commitment on the hour. So unfortunately, we have to stop now. I'll just end with a joke. Roshi, we're talking about Mara being your favorite bedeviled character. I just
yeah,
realized Mara's favorite breakfast, bedeviled
Um,
eggs.
you tell the worst jokes. I think they're dad jokes. You're the master of dad jokes. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So that's close. Roshi, can we invite you to close us with a prayer or a dedication?
Yeah. Yeah, I'd like to just thank you so much and your wonderful team. Just so grateful. And I'll simply say the four vows of the Bodhisattvas. Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to transform them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The awakened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it.
Sadhu,
Thank you
sadhu,
for your
sadhu.
practice.
Thank you, dear beloved Roshi, for being with us. And my friends, please all bow to our teacher. Thank you for giving us your time, even though I know you have back-to-back teaching commitments, but you gave us your
I'm
time.
jumping
Oh,
slowly.
oh, okay. So, okay,
Okay.
I'll just close this. As a reminder, this recording will be uploaded onto the YouTube, Buddhism.net YouTube channel. We will take the month of June off, and then from July to September, Venerable Thupten Chodron and other venerables from Savasti Abbey will guide us on the 3 higher trainings. Don't miss that. And by the way, Roshi will be very happy with this lineup because she kept encouraging us to have female monastics. And in 2026, we will have more female venerables than males, thanks to Roshi's constant encouragement. And with that, my dear friends, we'll see you all in July. Thank you very much.
Thank you.